This morning, we are moving along to Nehemiah chapter 6 in our study of this period of Old Testament history in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Still dealing with the wall. So Nehemiah was successful, as we've seen, as far as motivating the Jews to rebuild the wall. So that was a victory. He successfully resolved the inner issues that were going on. Another victory. They've overcome plenty of opposition, not only in Nehemiah's time, but in Ezra's time, building the temple. There was pretty much persistent or consistent opposition and persecution, however you want to put it. That was the case with the wall as well. And it was the case again, and it's going to be the case again. The devil's workers don't sleep. I think if there's anything that we can take from a study of Ezra and Nehemiah, among a few things, God's power and God's help, and seeing His will accomplished, but also the fact that the enemies of God don't sleep. They don't stop. They don't just give up. It never stops, and that's what we've been seeing. Several lessons. It may seem repetitive, or it may seem like we're looking at the same lesson over and over, but even in that, there is a lesson in that in itself. The opposition to whatever God's will is in a certain circumstance is always going to be there in one way or another. And the challenges were still going to be coming up for Nehemiah and the others. So they had to work under the threat of enemies. We've seen that in our study last chapter 5. We saw a period of famine, it seems. And as difficult as things were, it was made even worse by that unfortunate situation we looked at last week with the poor being taken advantage of by the rich, and thankfully Nehemiah took care of that very effectively. So the Jews were struggling, and they needed help. So Nehemiah was the perfect leader. Not that there couldn't have been other leaders that could have done the job as well as he did, but he did it so well and effectively, such an influence, such an example as far as refusing the allotments or the perks, the accommodations that the king that went along with that role that he had, all for the love of the people. They don't get it, so I'm not gonna take it. Wouldn't be right. That's a true leader right there. And we made the comparison to Uriah last week because they are the principles on which they stood were similar. My men can't go home to their wives, so I'm not going to go home to my wife. My people don't get these special allocations from the king's storehouse, so I'm not going to take those special allocations from the king's storehouse. And because of his leadership, they were able to continue more or less without interruption. But the enemies were still watching. They still weren't crazy about it. The Nehemiah and the Jews were experiencing victory after victory as far as their opposition, but they were still there, and they weren't just gonna let it happen without any other efforts. And that's kind of where it comes in chapter 6, Nehemiah chapter 6. The two main villains at this time rear their ugly heads again. Good old Sanballat and Tobiah. They're gonna try again, and that's what we see at the beginning. Just to read the first few verses. It says, "Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, Come and let us meet together at Hakaphirim in the plain of Ono. But they intended to do me harm. And I sent messengers to them, saying, I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. So Nehemiah knew what was going on, but as far as the way this unfolds, this was another attempt. Can we have a meeting together? How about let's meet face to face and, I don't know, discuss some things? Who knows what the pretense was or whatever that he was suggesting. But as Nehemiah says here, they intended to do me harm. He knew that this was some kind of trap, some kind of trick. There's nothing sincere or genuine about this. They have ulterior motives. They are going to harm me in some way. So he said, I can't go. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? 4 times, he says, this happened. Over a certain period of time. The time is not specified. But 4 different times, they tried to get him to meet with them. And then he says in verse 5, in the same way, Sanballat for the 5th time sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand, and in it was written, It is reported among the nations, and Geshem also says it, that you and the Jews intend to rebel. If Geshem says it, it must be true, right? That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, there is a king in Judah. And now the king will hear of these reports. So now come and let us take counsel together. So now he's laid it on a little bit more heavy. And he tells them outright, here's the deal. Everybody knows what y'all are up to. You plan to rebel against the king. You're going to set up this city. You got your temple. You're building your wall as protection. You're going to feel nice and cozy and safe in there. And then what you're going to do is you're going to declare your own independence and monarchy. And we all know that you're the one who's going to be the king. You're planning on making yourself a king over this new city. All the nations are talking about it, he says, and even Geshem, the Arab. At least in the ESV it says Geshem. Yours might say a different name there, but at any rate, he says, we also know that you've set up prophets who are going to go around and proclaim there's a king in Judah. And we're going to tell the king. So what do you think about meeting together now? See, they're putting pressure on him. How's that meeting sound now? Trying to blackmail him, basically. But he says, then I sent to him, saying, no such things as you say have been done, for you are inventing them out of your own mind. You just made that up. Plain and simple. For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from the work and it won't be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. Clearly, Nehemiah wasn't falling for it. He still knew that whatever the arrangement of this meeting, it was intended to do harm to him in some way. So he knew that it would not be a wise thing to go. But he did answer. Remember, we made a point a few lessons ago that sometimes the insults of enemies don't even warrant or deserve a response. Sometimes not even responding to it is the most powerful reaction you can have to it. But sometimes there is a response needed. Sometimes it does need to be addressed. And this obviously was one of those times. This was a pretty serious charge. It was totally made up, and he tells them that. You've just straight made this up. You made it up. Not a single thing that you just said, as far as our intentions or steps that have been taken, like setting up prophets. You've got it all set up, for the prophets to declare we have a king again in Jerusalem. No such thing has happened. You just made it up. But he also says what they were trying to do was scare us into stopping. It worked before, didn't it? Back with the temple rebuild, Nehemiah was not going to let it work again. He was not going to stop. So he says what they're thinking is their hands will drop, their hearts will sink, which will result in their hands dropping from the work. But he says, contrary to that, God, please strengthen my hands. Give us more strength to continue this. So he was not going to stop the work for anything, especially to feed into their plans. So verse 10 says, now when I went into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Deliah, who was confined to his home, he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. They are coming to kill you by night. So this seems to be somebody that was trying to help him. Come into the temple. We'll shut you in there. Your life's in danger. You need to go into hiding. So come into the temple. And we'll close the doors. But Nehemiah said, should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in. What did he mean by that? So this man is telling him you need to come into the temple so you will live. Nehemiah says, how could I go into the temple and live? Which would be the same as saying, how could I go into the temple and not die? Where did he get that idea? Why did he say that? Okay, there were laws against certain people going into the temple. And basically it was, you had to be of the priestly group, or the tribe of Levi at the very least, and the priests, only they were allowed to go, at least where he was talking about going. So even in a time where his life was in danger, perhaps, and some of his brothers here, at least one of them, was sort of pressing it into his mind even more that you are in danger, your life is in jeopardy here. He still had it in the forefront of his mind, or at least up there in the forefront of his mind, I'm not going to violate God's law to save my own skin. I don't have the right to do that. So I will not go in, was his resolve. Mm-hmm.
You Americans Standard Bible, could one such as I go into the temple to save his life? So it sounds different.
Okay.
It would be like, would I do such a thing to use or abuse the temple in order to save my life? And then in the note, in Mark, it says, literally, it's not into the temple to save his life, but into the temple and live, just as you have.
Yeah.
So it's too bad, because really that is more sensible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too bad that sometimes translators say, well, let's be helpful here. Instead of going to the temple and live, probably means to save his life. No,
Yeah.
it means just what you said.
Yeah. Mine does the exact opposite. It says, and live, but then on the bottom it says, or it could be to save his life. So I agree, though. And live, if that's what the text says, then that's what the text should say, plain and simple. 99% of the time. There are some times when things just don't work into another language, that literally don't make sense. But 99% of the time, I would say, just put what it says. And I don't want them to tell me what Nehemiah meant. I want them to tell me what Nehemiah said, and I will have the capacity to know what he meant. So he's not going in. If nothing else, he says that plainly. I will not go. I will not do this. I will not go in. Then in verse 12 he says, and I understood and saw that God had not sent him, but he had pronounced the prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. Interesting. For this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in this way and sin, and so they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, O my God, according to these things that they did, and also the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. So he says, I thought this was interesting language. I understood and saw that God had not sent him. That is Shemaiah. God, and the reason I point this out is, God it doesn't say that God told me, but he perceived, he understood and saw, he realized that this was not something that God, he had ulterior motives too, in other words, to, not necessarily to get me killed, he doesn't say to trap me to get me killed, but just to make me sin, so that they could give me a bad name. And that leads to kind of an interesting, just general spiritual principle. Bad people want good people to sin. Just a fact of life. Sometimes bad people want good people to sin. Yes, sir.
Because their way of life is a reproach to them.
Exactly, yeah. They, in so many different ways, it pleases them to hear that these good people do bad things, because it makes them feel better about their own life, their own guilty conscience, to one extent or another. And this is a perfect example of even somebody who should have been, a brother to Nehemiah, who was also playing into the enemy's plot. Just again, he says, what they're trying to do is give me a bad name and taunt me. Well, how can they do that? Well, they don't have anything on me, so all they can do is try to manipulate events so that they do have something on me. And the same kinds of things happen today, for sure. Bad people, people of the world, want good people, God's people, to sin. And they'll try to get them to, on occasion. So that was the secret informer. Okay, then finally, verse 15 says, so the wall was finished. Didn't work. None of it worked. He didn't stop. Still didn't stop. Didn't bite. Didn't fall for it. And now it says, so the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month Elul in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem. For they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. The nations were scared now. What was their reaction before? Do you remember?
If a fox jumps on it,
Okay,
jump down.
there was one of them. So kind of just mocking a little bit. Almost, they were amused. It's like they were amused. Any other reactions you remember? I mean, they're kind of in the same text, same context in chapter 4. When Sanballat heard that they were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged. And that's when they started making fun of him. So at least Sanballat was angry. Some of the other ones seemed to be more amused in a way. Now they're scared. And the reason they're scared is because they perceived that this was all accomplished because their God was helping them. Now, why would that make them afraid? Shouldn't that make them kind of impressed? Like, wow, their God actually does things. Why were they afraid? Yeah, that is why they were afraid, because their God actually does things. It reminds me of Rahab in Jericho again, where she said to the spies, she said, we know what y'all are here to do. Everybody knows. We know that what your God does. We know what your God can do. We've heard. So we're all scared because your God is unlike any other God that we've ever heard of and seen, and his power is unlike anything. We don't stand a chance. So they were terrified. Well, now they're terrified. And I love how it says, they fell greatly in their own esteem. Now, that can be a good thing, by the way. It can be a good thing for somebody to fall in their own esteem. Anybody want to translate that for me? Or paraphrase what it might mean to fall greatly in your own esteem?
I can't say that in polite. I'm a fool.
Okay.
I'm quite a fool.
To think I'm a fool, yeah. They're humbled. They're not as confident, at least, in themselves that they were before. They, to view yourself great in your own esteem is the opposite of humility, really. And now they fell greatly in their own esteem. But the sad thing is it didn't work for their spiritual well-being. It wasn't necessarily a good thing. It just allowed them to be scared, is what it was. That now they're not as big and bad as they thought they were. They're not as safe as they thought they were. And it reminds me again of Saul whenever he started to perceive that David had God on his side. Yeah, go ahead.
And to fear the Lord is the first stage of wisdom.
It is the first step, yeah. It's the beginning of wisdom. So, that's why I say they may be in a good position here. I mean, in theory, they're in a good position. It all depends. Now they're sort of at a spiritual and moral crossroads. Where do I go from here? What do we do? Now, this is why I mentioned Saul did have God on his side at first. He started very strongly, but then he messed up and God had departed from him, and now David, he's with David. Well, we read at least twice in different words that Saul recognized that God had left him and was now with David. So what did Saul do? He made David his perpetual enemy. That could have been a great time for Saul to be humbled, but he didn't go the right way at that crossroads. He decided in a more selfish way, David is my enemy. Sad. It's a sad passage and a sad pivotal moment in Saul's life. Well, they're kind of in a similar situation now. They are scared. They realize that their God is with them and is capable. Well, that's all it says as far as that goes. The next it says, moreover, in those days the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and Tobiah's letters came to them. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Ezra, and his son Jehohanan had taken the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, as his wife. Also they spoke of his good deeds in my presence and reported my words to him. And Tobiah sent letters to make me afraid. So still, Tobiah at least hadn't given up yet, quite. They're still trying whatever they can try. And it's kind of interesting, this little back and forth that they had going. it says, that, let's see, verse 17, they were sending letters to Tobiah. Tobiah was sending letters to them. And it says they spoke of his good deeds in my presence and reported my words to him. It's kind of a little not exactly clear because of verse 18 mentions a lot of people. So I guess it could go a couple different ways as to whose good deeds they're referring to, whether it's Tobiah or one of the others. Seems like Tobiah might be the most logical. But at any rate, Tobiah is still sending letters to the people of Judah to make Nehemiah afraid. So then chapter 7 goes in and says, now when the wall had been built and I had set up the doors and the gatekeepers, the singers and the Levites had been appointed, I gave my brother Hananiah and Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem, for he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot, and while they are still standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. Appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their guard posts and some in front of their own homes. So, just sort of setting things in order. I do think it's an interesting and powerful point. Why Nehemiah gave these men, or at least Hananiah, charge over Jerusalem is because he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. There's a pretty good lesson in that in itself. This is how it should be always in the church, in the government, in everything where power is involved. Who is the more faithful and God-fearing person? When you really think about it, as far as from the Christian perspective, why would we ever think to do it any differently than that? Why on earth would we possibly even consider letting someone who is less faithful and less God-fearing be in a position of power than somebody else? They may not be the most faithful and God-fearing person in the whole world, but the more faithful and God-fearing person is obviously going to be the better choice. But in the church, I've used this analogy before. There may be a member who is a very influential in the community and has a hand in so many different things, and everybody knows who they are. Maybe they're a lawyer that has billboards around the city, or maybe they're the president of some business or bank or something, or the superintendent at the school, or something, and that automatically translates to some people as he would be a great man to have as a leader in the church, as one of the elders or something like that. That's not necessarily the case, and many horror stories have probably come out of decisions like that made. The main criterion should be, is he faithful and God-fearing? That's what Nehemiah thought anyway. I set him over Jerusalem. I guess no offense to his brother Hananiah, because he seems to just say this about Hananiah, but he doesn't say they were more faithful and God-fearing than many others. He says he, when he talks about Hananiah, the governor of the castle. But still, that's a powerful principle and we should keep that in mind ourselves. Bad things happen when that stops happening. Setting faithful and God-fearing men over in positions of authority. Okay, applications. Number one, Nehemiah is an excellent example of how to deal with potential distractions. Okay, fair enough. The way he dealt with the distractions is he didn't let them be distractions. That's pretty much what it was. How can I stop? How could I stop if I leave it and come down to you to this meeting? I'll be stopping the work. I can't do that. That reminds me of the apostles in Acts 6 when the widows Hellenist or the Grecian widows were being neglected according to the Grecian Christians. And they went to the apostles, and the apostles said, it wouldn't be right for us to stop what we're supposed to be doing to do this. So you appoint men that you think will be the best for the job, and or you choose men, and we'll appoint them over that work, because it wouldn't be right for us to stop doing what we are supposed to be doing. That's kind of the attitude Nehemiah had. It wouldn't be right for me to stop while I come down to you. So, which really, we have to understand, that was the most diplomatic and sort of kind way he could turn this down. He knew that they were trying to hurt him, but he didn't say, I know what you're trying to do, I'm not falling for it. He just said, wouldn't be right. Not that he was lying, because that was true. I don't want to stop this work. I'm doing a great work, can't come down, sorry. We are very good at distractions, at being distracted. Probably now more than ever in our history, because we have so many distractions, more than anybody's ever had. And our very attention span is being changed because of some of these tools that we have at our disposal, the internet, and these apps that have taken over the world, that the whole purpose of them is, 10, 15-second videos, to the point where people can't even handle a 30-second video today might as well be 2 hours long to people's brains. That's how bad it's gotten. So that has adverse effects in other areas too. We can't stay disciplined and focused on tasks as we should, because there are so many other things that we can do. When we get bored, I've got this, and this, and this, and this, and our mind, that's where our mind goes. So the key is to have the mental fortitude and the discipline like Nehemiah had. I'm not going to stop. Period. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to not doing it. Paul said in Colossians 3:2, set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth. Set your mind on the things that are above. That should be our priority. Heavenly things. It's not that we shouldn't ever think about earthly things, because we have to. It's unavoidable. But what's our priority? What's foremost in our minds? Number 2, we must be wise enough to know when to speak and when to refrain from speaking. I already made this point. There were times when Nehemiah did not even respond. Even when there were lies being told about him, much like Jesus did. Do you not want to say anything about what they're saying? Didn't say a word. But there were times that Nehemiah did address something that had been spoken. These things have not happened. You just made them up. Very interesting passages in Proverbs 26 that sometimes are called out as being contradictory, and it doesn't help matters that they are back to back. Okay, Proverbs 26 verses 4 and 5 says this: answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. That's verse 4. Now here's verse 5. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Anybody want to unravel that mystery? Speaking of attention span, maybe the Proverbs writer didn't have a very good one and he forgot. He just said, don't answer. No, I'm just being sarcastic. Yes?
Could it be that when it's important that he not be wise in his own estimation, that you should answer him according to his folly?
Okay, that's certainly a plausible explanation. By the way, in situations like this, let's just say, for instance, if somebody did bring this up and say, how can you say the Bible doesn't have contradictions? couldn't get more of a contradiction than this. 1 second, he says, don't answer a fool according to his folly, because then you'll just stoop to his level. The very next verse, he says, answer a fool according to his folly, so that he's not wise in his own eyes. All a person who, the defender of the Bible has to do in that case is, all you have to do is there has to be a plausible explanation. You don't have to prove anything. If it's plausible, that already neutralizes the alleged contradiction. That is just one of probably several plausible explanations. But, the point that's being made here, and sort of interpreting those two verses and to make this point is, sometimes the best thing to do is to not say anything. Don't even stoop. But there are other times, depending on what the fool is saying, probably is one of the things, one of the factors, it needs to be called out. It needs to be answered. And there also could be the concept of according to his folly could be interpreted in a different way depending on the context. It's not necessarily answering him in the way he spoke, but answering him based on the thing that he said, addressing what he said. Because what he said might be what is folly, and you need to address the folly of what he said, but not necessarily answering him in the way that would be stooping to his level in the fullest sense of the term. Sometimes there's a time to speak and a time to be quiet. And I would say the times to be quiet are very much more, probably, than the times to speak. We struggle with that. Okay, number 3, it's important to remember that both our actions and reactions impact those around us. And because of that, we need to conduct ourselves in a way that causes others to glorify God, either because of what we've done or to do likewise, rather than to behave in a way that brings reproach. Remember, they were trying, according to Nehemiah's own words, this man was hired, first of all, so that I would be afraid, but ultimately so that I would sin. He was trying to get me to sin. But Nehemiah rose above that. And, if he would have gone along, that would have been not a massive stain, I wouldn't say, but it would have been a blemish in his reputation because they were going to use that. All we got to do is get him to do something. It's kind of, it wasn't that different with Jesus also. They couldn't get anything on Jesus. Think about Daniel. They couldn't get anything on Daniel, so they manipulated events to get him, to trick him, or trick the king, rather, into punishing him. They were trying to do it here. Well, we need to conduct ourselves in a way that causes others to glorify God. That's what Jesus said, about letting your light shine. Let your good deeds be seen, shine before men so that they may see your good works and glorify God. It's also, kind of what Jesus did. So, look at how the talk of his deeds spread, and God was glorified. Peter said to behave in a way, keep your conduct honest or righteous before the Gentiles so that they won't have something to say against you. Again, same principle. Nehemiah is a good example of that. As much as is in our power. But also calming situations. Sometimes tensions rise up and things escalate. Good leaders of God's people need to be able to neutralize those situations, de-escalate it, keeping calm and resolving that rather than making it worse. And Nehemiah is just one of several examples in the Bible to illustrate that.